Well, what a fantastic turnout this is. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the evening. My name is Anna David. I'm a professor and consultant in obstetrics and maternal fetal medicine. And I'm director of the Institute for Women's Health, and I'm introducing this on behalf of the Faculty of Population Health Science, who have done a great job in bringing together a really fantastic programme for International Women's Day 2024. And I'm delighted to welcome Jasvinder Sanghera CBE to really give us a talk about what it is to be a woman in this day and age in certain sections of society, and to really make us think about women's health in the very holistic sense. So I'm going to hand over to the person who's chairing, who will give a bit of background about Jasvinder and her journey. And please join me in thanking Jasvinder for taking time out at very short notice to come along and speak to us this evening. Thank you very much, Jasvinder.
Hi, everybody. I'm the person who's chairing. I'm Jenny Gamlin, based in the Institute for Global Health and Director for the Centre for Gender Health and Social Justice. And also really, really pleased, and this is a real privilege to be here chairing this session with Jasvinder. But before I introduce her, I just wanted to share a few reflections I'd had in that many of when I spoke to many of my colleagues and I said to them that I was chairing this event, they were all quite telling me how wonderful Jasvinder was, and that many of them actually knew people she'd helped and were really impressed by Karma Nirvana, the organisation she's worked with, and know that it's helped many people. And so I listened to to Jasvinder's story before this session, and it made me reflect on the stark similarities with my own work. So I'm an anthropologist, and sort of thinking anthropologically, sort of the basic foundations that underlie forced marriage are this sort of dyad of shame and honour. And it made me reflect on how these reverberate across so many societies in many different ways. And it brought me to the question of how, as a society, communities and groups of women can grapple with this dyad in the public and private sphere, and the dictates of sort of social ordering that at one end lead to forced marriage, suicide, and at others define how we dress and how we behave as women, and what might be the outcome in a court of law if a woman has been raped or murdered. So this is brought into being, by the social treatment of the human body. So these are just things to reflect on International Women's Day. So I'm really delighted to present Jasvinder. And so I'll just read a little bit about Jasvinder's life. So she's a survivor of forced marriage. She's the founder of Karma Nirvana, a national award-winning charity that supports both men and women affected by honour-based abuse and forced marriages. She's an expert advisor to the courts for matters of child, civil and criminal proceedings, a chair of domestic homicide reviews, and was instrumental in ensuring that all UK police forces are required to improve their understanding of honour-based abuse and forced marriage by inspections conducted by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. Her memoir, Shame, which she will be signing later on, was a top 10 bestseller and described in the House of Lords as a political weapon. Jasvinder's recognised as bringing the issue of forced marriage into the public domain, and Prime Minister David Cameron stated that her work turned my head in the issue of forced marriage. Her work is recognised as being pivotal to the creation of a specific UK forced marriage criminal offence in 2014. In addition, her claim of sexual harassment against a peer in the House of Lords was the first in its history and successfully led to an increase in reporting and significant changes in the House of Lords policy and practice regarding greater debates and reforms, resulting in the House of Lords' independent inquiry into sexual harassment and bullying. We'll encourage people online, please, to submit their questions using the Slido link, which we've put in the chat. And we'll hold a Q&A session after Jasvinder's talk has finished. So I'm just going to hand straight over to her now for the presentation.
Thank you. Do I need that? Because I've got this mic. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you. This is where I say I hope you're clapping afterwards. Can everybody hear me? Yes, great. So the mic's okay. Wonderful. So thank you for being here in the evening. And thank you to those online that are joining us. I understand there are around 100 people online too. I still pray for platforms to speak, and I will tell you why. And I'll also explain to you why I say my honour is their shame. So my father came to this country in the late 1950s. Like many migrants, he was invited here by the UK government in search of work. So he came from rural Punjab, saw Britain as a place to work and to raise his family. My mother joined him later, and we were born here. So I am one of 7 sisters, and I have 1 brother. We all went to school through the British education system, and I watched the majority of my sisters being taken out of the British classroom at the age of 15 years old to marry men they'd only ever met in photographs. They would disappear one by one, and nobody in school questioned it. In fact, the attitude was then, and I have to say, it still is in some places, it's what they do. You know, it's their culture. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to be called a racist and look the other way. And that's exactly what happened to my sisters. And in fact, I have to say that my sisters also went without question. And that's interesting, isn't it? And I'll talk about why that is and how that conditioning happens within a family dynamic. Well, I was the one that said, no, I'm not marrying a stranger. I was born here. I want to go to school. Dare I say, further education. You know, I'm standing in a university. I do not take my independence for granted. As somebody standing here before you, I had to fight for my independence. Today is World Book Day. I did not read a book until I was 28 years old. We were not encouraged to read. So my mother sat me down, came home from school one day, and she said to me, you are marrying this man, and you were promised to him from the age of 8. So there's me, the 8-year-old, and I remember looking at this photograph and thinking, he's shorter than me. He's older than me, and I don't want to marry a stranger. You know, it was a normal day coming home from school. But I'd seen it happen to my sisters, and very often families will marry you in order of age, unless there's a reason for you to quickly be hurried into a marriage. You know, you've now become a cause of shame or dishonor, and the family want to deal with you by marrying you off. So sometimes that can happen. And I remember saying to my mother, I'm not marrying him. You know, I want to go to school. I want to go to university. And my mother was very clear that where you are going, you will not need an education, and you will not dishonor this family by saying no, because the promise of a marriage is really important and incredibly shameful to say no to. And please do not confuse yourselves with what a forced marriage is and what an arranged marriage is. It really is not rocket science. An arranged marriage is a tradition that has been happening for centuries, okay? And the important factor here is consent. You know, both people are saying yes. If one says no, it becomes a forced marriage. And thankfully, Karma Nirvana championed the change in the law in England and Wales last year in February, whereby now you cannot marry in England or Wales until you are 18 years old. Before, it was 16 with parental consent. So there's been a change in the law, which is great. So I protested more so when I was 15 and a half, that those teenage years are a real challenge to a family that operates an honor dynamic within it, because, you know, you're pushing all the boundaries, aren't you, as a teenager? You want to express yourself, you want to go out with your mates, you want to wear makeup, you want to have mobile. All these things were deemed dishonorable and shameful. And what we understood is if we cross the line, we put ourselves at risk. So that punishment is always waving over you. You know, you are very worried about that. So my parents could see I became a threat to this marriage and took me out of education at the age of 15 and a half. I was held a prisoner in my own home. Nobody noticed me missing at school. Nobody asked. And actually, if you think about it, I know this was in the 80s, but who would they have asked? They would have asked my parents. They would ask the very people that were doing this to me. They would have seen the parents, which is still happening, as the protective factor. And what you have to remember in this space is that those victims at risk of child marriage, forced marriage, honor abuse, female genital mutilation have multiple perpetrators. And those perpetrators are in the family. And I'm ashamed to say they are also women. The key perpetrator in my life was my mother, and then my sisters who ganged up on me and were bullying. So I agreed to the marriage in the end purely to buy back my freedom, and that was my opportunity to plan my escape. I ran away from home at the age of 16 years old to make the point I was born here and I should have a right to an education, and indeed to marry in the future if indeed I want to get married in the future. My parents reported me missing to the police, and here I was, a 16-year-old in Newcastle up north, because I thought Derby's here where I was born. Newcastle's all the way up there, they'll never find me up there, even then I was astute in thinking like that. And here was a police officer faced with a 16-year-old girl begging him not to send her back home. And thankfully, he believed me. He gave me the right policing response. If he had sent me back home, my parents would have given that Oscar-winning performance on the doorstep, but as soon as they closed the front door, my life would have been completely different. If any professional ever asks a member of a family, are you forcing your daughter or son into a marriage? Be prepared for the answer. They're always going to say no. Nobody is going to admit to forcing somebody to marry, especially because it is a criminal offence now here in this country. So I get the question, but please look behind that. But he did say this to me. He says, Jasvinder, I will not tell your family where you are on the condition that you ring home and you tell them that you are safe and well, which is exactly what I did. Now, please remember, I left home to make the point that I didn't want to marry a stranger. My hope was that my family would see sense and they would say, come back, you know, it's okay. So I went into this red payphone when we used to have them, you know, with all these coins in my hand and putting it into the payphone. And I rang home and my mother answered the phone. And I'm going to share with you from my first book, the response that she gave to me. The reason why is because this response significantly changed my life forever, that of my children and grandchildren, but also it is a response that many victims and survivors live with today, and many fear hearing also, okay? So when I refer to the Gurdwara, it's the Sikh temple. My parents were Punjabi Sikh. My mother answers the phone, I was 16, missing them terribly, and this is what she says to me. She says, thanks to you, I can't walk the streets of Derby anymore. I can't go to the Gurdwara because people are talking. People spit at me. There was a pause. I thought she'd finished, but she was just catching her breath. You'll get what you deserve for ruining your family, you'll see. In a few months' time, you'll be rolling around in the gutter, which is no more than you deserve. You will amount to nothing. Nothing, do you hear me? I hope you give birth to a daughter who does to you what you have done to me. Then you will know what it feels like to raise a prostitute. I'll come back, Mum. I want to come back, but I won't marry that man. I'm only just 16. I want to live my own life. I want to go to college. I was talking as quickly as I could, trying to get my explanation out, but she started shouting over me, and her voice was full of scorn. Live your own life then, and good luck to you. In our eyes, you're dead. And with that, she slammed the phone down. You've shamed us. You are dead in our eyes. You've shamed us. You are dead in our eyes. Had I really done something so terrible that my parents could disown me, had they really stopped loving me, was it such a crime to want my own life? So at that juncture in my life and that of other victims out there today, there is a choice. And the choice is this. You can go home, have your family, everything you've ever known, and not be disowned and rejected. But you have to forfeit your freedom. You have to force yourself into being with that man you're expected to marry. And let's be clear here. If you are forced into a marriage, you will be raped on your wedding night, and then you will be repeatedly raped. That's what will happen to you. And then you will have to live within a family dynamic that deprives a woman of her personal independence. That's your life. Or you can have everything that you all have in this room, and that is freedom, rights, independence, etc., but it means not having your family. That's the choice. I chose the latter, and subsequently I've been disowned by my family for 42 years. They refuse to talk to me or my children or my grandchildren. If I go to Derby today, they will cross the road and totally ignore me. You know, 2 years ago, I learnt on Facebook that my brother had passed away. So you don't hear news either from your family, you've gone. And that is because you are deemed such a shameful human being for asserting yourself and asking for the right as a woman to marry who you choose and the right to be independent. That's why I say, and I said it on the first slide, that my honor is their shame. I deem myself to be an honorable human being. It is them that are shameful to have treated me and others like this. So from my perspective, in those first years, I left home at the age of 16, you know, and you have to remember, when you grow up within a family dynamic where you are prevented from integrating, you know, my mother taught us growing up, the worst insult you can bring to our front door is that you are behaving like a white woman. They were bigoted views, and we were told this. You know, what she meant was anything Western, you don't do. So we were prevented from doing that. And trust me, that is still happening. And I will demonstrate to you how as well. So disownment was unexpected. I never thought I would be disowned, you know. And I describe my years of 16 to 19 as living life with the curtains drawn because of that depression, because of those attempts to take my own life, because of the void of missing your family. It is immense. And this is where those victims, survivors, whatever term they wish to use, will be drawn to want to go back. You know, they will be drawn into that, and they will feel the pressure of going back. And with that, there are risks, not only psychologically, but physically also. And we have to think about that too. And I didn't see people like me, you know, in the UK. I thought I was the only one. I absolutely fundamentally believed that I was the perpetrator, that I had done this to my family, because that is how they make you feel. You are guilty. So the way I managed to start living my life without my family was by managing my expectations. So that was to remove all expectations of a family. You know, not think a mother's meant to do this, a sister's meant to do this, a brother's meant to do this. Just remove all expectations. You know, they say disappointments are born out of expectations, don't they? My daughter had the big fat Indian wedding 10 years ago. You know, we had 300 guests at that wedding. Not one member of my family was there, you know, but my friends were there who become family, have become family to my children, you know, and, you know, she had that day because of the decision I made when I was 16. I do not regret my decision at all. My children and grandchildren will not inherit that legacy of abuse. You know, when you as a professional get this right and you protect that person, you are shifting a generation. That's what you are doing. So then I educated myself. You know, age of 28, I read a book for the first time. You know, and then I did my degree in while I was pregnant, actually, my final year, and I got a first, by the way, just saying. So, you know, that determination, but I was still out there in the wilderness. And what changed was this. So this is my sister, Rabina. She was a year and a half older than me. She was married before me. So she was taken out of education, taken abroad, and she was there for a number of months and forced to marry this man. She came back as a married woman, and she was actually put back into my year, even though there's a year and a half age gap. She missed 9 months, but nobody asked where she'd been. Nobody. Even her dress changed. You know, she was no longer allowed to wear a Western dress. And what happens is, you know, the way it works is, you know, they marry somebody from abroad, and then you call them over into this country, you know, a spousal visa, they come here. My sister suffered a horrific marriage. And the pattern always within the family dynamic is to ensure you protect the reputation of the family first and you come second. So in terms of decision making, as a woman, you are constantly thinking about them before yourself. And what my mother would always do, and I watched all my sisters experiencing domestic abuse, she would talk them into staying with the abuser for the sake of the family. That's what would happen. And then she would go home. But Rabina had such a horrific marriage. You know, my family finally allowed her to come back home with a 6-week-old baby. She had a little boy. And then later on, Rabina married for love. Now, I say married for love because that isn't the norm. It wasn't the norm in my family. You know, in an arranged marriage, you grow to love somebody. So she married for love, and my parents accepted it because he ticked all the boxes. You know, he was Sikh, he was the same caste, etc., etc. So she married for love, and within that marriage, she suffered physical abuse, psychological abuse. And I would see her in secret, because when you're disowned, sometimes you do have secret relationships with your family members, and she was one of them. And I would say to her, come to me, you know, I will protect you. And she would say, it's all right for you to say, because you don't have to think about izzat, which translates as honor and shame. You don't have to think about what people think. You don't have to think about mum and dad. So again, you can see what she's doing. She's putting that before all her decision making. And she was absolutely right, because I no longer had regard for that anymore. And she went back to him. They called the local community leader. He talked her to go back, and he said, there was a local Indian councillor who became the first Lord Mayor actually in Derby. He said, if you leave your husband, it will kill your family. What he meant by that was it would kill the family's reputation. That's what he meant. So she went back. I was a market trader back then in Leeds and Bradford, and I was 23 at the time. And this woman came to my stall and said, you need to ring home, something terrible has happened to your sister. If I don't hear about any news. So I rang home, and my mother answered the phone, and I said, you know, what's happened? And she said, it's Rabina. She's died. She set herself on fire and she committed suicide. But she followed it by saying it was better for her to take her life than for her to dishonor this family and divorce her husband. And for me, that was the day of transition. Because for me, you cannot help when you're a disowned person. Even though you mind your expectations, you live in hope. You know, one day your family might talk to you. One day they may accept you. And it was on that day when she went that I finally owned the fact that I was a victim. I wasn't the perpetrator. I hadn't done this to my family. They had done this to me. And that was the reason why I founded the charity Karma Nirvana back in 1993. And the mission back then was simply to increase reporting, reduce isolation, and to save lives. And it was, for the first time ever, I started to talk about my experiences and that of Rabina's as well. So when I look at the early days of Karma Nirvana, you know, in 1993 to 1996, I would say, I couldn't get more than one person to hear what I had to say, you know, because the attitude was always, show us the evidence. You know, where are the statistics? You know, you have to evidence it, don't you? And I would say, well, I am the statistic, and so is Rabina, because I couldn't see victims or survivors. I couldn't hear them, I couldn't see them. And they would always say, oh, this doesn't happen in England. You know, it's a democracy. It's happening over there somewhere in Pakistan or India. And, you know, trying to get people to understand this is happening to somebody who was born in this country was a real struggle. Okay. And I have to say, those in those communities where this was happening were the people that were out there to threaten me. I used to get that. I've learned how to look for bombs under my car. I've had death threats. I've had panic alarms in my house, etc., and it would come from those very people. And for me, actually, that is an indicator of making a difference now. You know, that's how I see it. So, but the people that were like-minded were people in the statutory sector, in the voluntary sector. They are the people that have helped this campaign. You know, we couldn't do this. This isn't just me. This is a team of people, volunteers and like-minded people. So slowly we gathered momentum. And, you know, I've learned to, you know, walk around obstacles and not into them. You know, you've got to keep on going, haven't you? If you have conviction, then that's what you do. You don't give up. You keep on finding a way. So these victims and survivors were like Shafilia. This is just one case I'll share with you. You know, when I look at the case of Shafilia Ahmed, whose case was like mine, you know, but, you know, this is in 2000s. This was me in the 80s. This is all the women today that are calling the Karma Nirvana helpline. So Shafilia Ahmed was born in Britain. She went to school in Warrington in England. She was an A-star student at school. She wanted to be a barrister. That was her ambition. And Shafilia would be beaten by her mother and father and called names like prostitute, slag, whore, because she wanted to go out with her friends. She wanted to wear makeup. She wanted to be educated, etc. Her first reporting started when she was 11 years old. By the time she got to age 15, she'd reported to 3 statutory organisations, but the reporting was changing. So she's telling the teacher, she told housing because she ran away from home. She told social care. She told the police, my parents beat me up because I've got a mobile phone. I have to hide it because I wear lipstick. In the morning, I go to my friend's house, I get changed, go to school, put my lipstick on in the toilets, go home, back to my friends, give her my clothes and go home. So she had this pattern, because what she was doing was, she was hiding that world from the family. She knows that they will deem this as dishonorable, okay? So when she was almost 16 years old, she started to report that she's been forced into a marriage. They are going to force me into a marriage, her parents. So the school called what is called a frank parents meeting, called mum and dad in, and Shafila was sat there. Now you tell me in what other circumstance would we sit a victim in the presence of perpetrators? We wouldn't, would we? But the point here is the family were never deemed to be perpetrators because they're family. Parents have powerful positions, okay? And agencies will see them as a protective factor, and we have to keep on repeating, in this space, they are the perpetrators. So she sat there saying, I just want to go to school. I just want to be able to go out with my friends, etc. And they obviously agreed to everything. Then she went home, and then what they did was they took her to Pakistan. But in order to get her onto the plane, so she wouldn't cause a scene at the airport, they drugged her. And they took her to Pakistan. So they drugged her to sleep on the plane, get her to Pakistan. She gets there. She swallows half a bottle of what is termed a toxic substance equivalent to bleach. So they bring her back to the UK. Now she's in A&E. So she's in hospital for a number of weeks. Mum or dad or another family member, sit by her bed 24/7, to the staff, the nurse, the doctor, etc. What loving parents. But the reason they're not leaving her side is because they do not want her to tell them what happened. They say she accidentally drank bleach thinking it was water, and she doesn't tell anybody. And then she goes home, never seen again. What happened to Shafila was that her mother and father laid her on the living room floor. One of them sat on her legs and held her down, and the other one stuffed something down her neck and suffocated her to death. Her siblings were all told to watch for 2 reasons. If you behave as dishonorably as her, this will happen to you. If you tell anybody, this will happen to you. I campaigned for 10 years to bring this case to trial, and Shafila's poetry was read in court. She used to write poetry in her bedroom from the age of 12. This is one of the poems that was read out in court. I don't pretend like we're the perfect family no more. Desire to live is burning, my stomach is burning, but all they think about is honor. I was like a normal teenage kid. I didn't ask too much, I just wanted to fit in, but my culture was different, but my family ignored. So did 4 statutory organisations. She was reporting. You think about it in terms of those that don't report. Yeah, how many? And tell you there are thousands out there. So we now have a National Day of Remembrance for Shafila Ahmed, which is July the 14th. That's her birthday. It was a long campaign. And every year, Karma Nirvana honours the memories of those who are murdered in what we term dishonourable killings. And sadly, there are always more to see on that screen. So, the campaigning continued for me personally. I think I personally put my pain into the charity. That was almost a way of coping and dealing with things. You put your trauma somewhere. I actually didn't think I had a traumatic event until later on. But anyway, the helpline that was in my front room, we had no calls in the first 5 years. And, the volunteers would say, Jasvinder, nobody ever calls. And I would say, look, they are out there. They just don't know we are here. So, we need to raise awareness to let people know. And, the helpline is now Home Office funded. At the time when I left the charity in 2018, it had received over 200,000 calls. Currently, it receives 900 calls a month. That helpline is there as a resource for you. So, if you are a statutory provider, or you know anybody that's at risk, or you're a friend and just wants to get some guidance, you ring the helpline. These are trained risk assessors in forced marriage, in honour-based abuse, in female genital mutilation. So they are there. So there's no excuse to get this wrong. You know, you're not on your own. You also now have civil and criminal legislation. You know, we have a criminal offence of forced marriage. You know, I was a campaigner for, again, 10 years campaigning for law. And, you know, even then, you know, Nazir Afzal is somebody who speaks, he would say to me, Jasvinder, we don't need law. You know, he was CPS. And I would say to him, why? And he would say, well, there's a raft of offences. You know, you don't need more. You've got abduction, kidnap, rape, you know, all the things associated with forced marriage. But I said to him, this stands. When I was 14 years old, when my mother was doing this to me and my family, I couldn't say to them, you can't do this to me, it's against the law. That's really important. I know the law is not a panacea, but it's a real opportunity to own this as a crime and to raise awareness. The very first criminal conviction happened in Birmingham, and then there was one the following week in Leeds. I was the expert witness for the one in Birmingham. And the mother, who was the perpetrator of taking a 13-year-old girl abroad to marry a stranger, twice her age, and she became pregnant as well, was British born, the mother. And the reason I want to tell you that is because some people hold this myth that it's only the older generation that are perpetuating this abuse. It is not. It is being passed on to younger generations. You know, we hear about brothers and uncles holding on to the honour of their sisters or their nieces and protecting it. And, you know, they will do anything to deal with them if they cross the line. You think about that. We now have a government forced marriage unit based here in London, and the majority of their work is the repatriation of British subjects who are taken abroad for the purposes of forced marriages and brought back. When I was around in 2018 at Karma Nirvana, they were repatriating around 250 people a year. A third of those were under the age of 12 years old, as young as 5 years old. So civil law, forced marriage protection orders, if you have somebody who you think is at risk, you can apply for a forced marriage protection order to not just protect them, but all the other siblings in the family. I've dealt with orders for people as young as 2 years old. If I have like a 16-year or 14-year-old at risk, I would put all the other children on that order. Every single one. I've never known a judge to turn one down. And you can apply for one on the grounds of perception. So you don't have to worry about having a lot of evidence either. And again, if you're unsure, call the charity. So we went from moving only women back in 2008, and that was my decision, because men would call the helpline, we'd have nowhere to refer them. So Karma Nirvana now supports men. The majority of men that call the Karma Nirvana helpline are gay men who are forced into marriages to hide their sexuality. So, you know, now we have a male refuge. So the charity, you know, is very significant. I left the charity after 25 years in 2018. I think it's healthy for the founder to move on, in all honesty. And, you know, for new people to come on, you've created a legacy, people taking it forward. And in fact, my daughter is now the executive director of Karma Nirvana, whereas we keep it in the family. We don't discuss Karma Nirvana, trust me, but we keep it in the family. But for me, in 2018, it was, where next? Now what? You know, and I have to say, it hit me first, because that was the first time I recognized that 16-year-old girl who was being forced to marry, who believed she was a perpetrator from 16 to 24, had a traumatic event. I never considered myself as being somebody that had experienced trauma. So I had to deal with a lot of that, actually. But nothing prepared me for this bit that comes next. And I have to say, what I'm sharing with you now is the second time I've shared it. I gave a talk 2 days ago, and that was the first time, and this is the second time I'm sharing it. And I'm sharing it because it is important to speak up in order for others to speak up. As Maya Angelou says, you know, if one woman stands up and speaks without even knowing it, you know, you are helping somebody else. So at every next level of your life is going to demand a different you. That's it. And for me, it was this, and that was the Me Too movement all around me in 2016, 2017. And I was holding a secret for 12 years. I never disclosed what was happening to me. for a number of reasons, and I will disclose to you why. And the big question I was asked when I was campaigning in 2005 and 6 for the criminalisation of forced marriage was this by a senior peer. You imagine being asked this question. Do you see that building, Jasvinder? It's the most powerful of decision making. If you sleep with me, I will make you a baroness within a year. That was Lord Leicester who asked me that question. And he asked me that in 2005. And I'm going to share with you what followed. Because if somebody like me, who is empowered, who stands up for the women's rights, for 12 years could not feel able to report, what does that say? So, I decided to come forward once I had left Karma Nirvana. And the reason for that is because he always said he would harm the charity if I dared to tell anybody. And lots of other things, if you tell anybody, this will happen. But the wilderness years in terms of reporting was, there was no process in the House of Lords. Nobody had ever reported sexual harassment and bullying. Can you believe that? So they did not know how to deal with me. So no process. And I felt like, you know, David and Goliath, he was Goliath, this is the House of Lords, this is a very senior peer, who are they going to believe? All the things when you're thinking about reporting abuse are going through my head. So I actually instructed a barrister, David Hooper, to help me, because when I went into the first meeting and with my partner, John, I wasn't me, you know, the words wouldn't come out. When I was waiting to go into the meeting with the commissioner, who was Lucy Scott-Moncrieff, I was thrown up in the toilets, you know. And anyway, enter Lucy Scott-Moncrieff, who was the commissioner for standards. David suggested meeting with her. And I remember I sat opposite her and saying, what are you going to do? You know, you're one of them. You know, you're part of the institution. You know, you're not going to do anything. You haven't even got a process, okay? But she said, please, just tell me what happened. Explain it to me, which I did. So she agreed to take it to the subcommittee on Lord's conduct, and the committee agreed to investigate it, and it passed the public interest test. And how they apply the balance in terms of, you know, proof, etc., is they apply the standard of balance and probabilities. You know, did this happen, likely to happen on the balance of what I'm saying, on balance of what this person is saying? So both of us submitted our witnesses and our statements, and thankfully I had 4 witnesses at the time. I was, you know, sharing with those very close to me what was happening, which I will share with you in a minute. And I remember at the time, I was, you know, a champion in terms of campaigning for change, in terms of the child marriage and forced marriage. And he completely prevented me from going to any meetings at all. I was cut out totally from all those important meetings for this legislation, totally. And I'll talk to you about how I managed that. And I was anonymous, totally. And obviously our statements were different. He denied it, I said it happened. So I was anonymous, and in terms of the House of Lords and how it was framed, you know, this is how it was framed. So he offered me a corrupt inducement to have sexual relations with him, and then I could be a baroness. He warned me of unspecified consequences if I did not accept his offer. So that was, I will harm the charity. That was, I will ruin you. That was, you will never have a seat in the House of Lords if ever you apply. That was, you will not be allowed to come to any more meetings when it's about campaigning for civil or criminal law. And he did cut me out of them. And how I managed to get to the meetings was because a very senior civil servant contacted me after about 6 months and said, Jasvinder, you're not attending the meetings. And I told him the truth. So he invited me to the meetings. So that's how I got a seat at the table, finally. So that kind of bullying and, you know, a person with entitlement, you know, behaving in this way. And I was just silent. And interestingly enough, in the Code of Conduct, they apply this concept of honour. There it is again, finding me, but in a completely different way, that members should act on their personal honour in the discharge of their parliamentary duties. So the argument was, this person didn't do that. So when we look at, what was the sexual harassment, for me, it was unwanted touching, sexual comments, taking advantage of me being alone, warning or specified consequences that I did not accept, which actually did happen. I remember once I had a book signing at the University of Derby. He was somebody who was attending as a guest of honour. And I had a call to say, because you won't sleep with me, I will not be coming to that event. We had lots of posters out, people were coming. And I remember ringing his PA and she said to me, oh, no, Jasvinder, he is definitely coming. But those sort of threats and intimidating emails in the silent years, even then. And I talk about the red carpet and the blue carpet because it's really interesting how people abuse power and display that abuse of power. In the House of Lords and House of Commons as well, I don't know if you've ever been in there, but there's a red carpet and a blue carpet. And basically he would say to me, you have the privilege of walking on the red carpet with me because I'm a member of the House of Lords and commoners walk on the blue carpet. So I said, so what if I put one foot in one and one foot in the other? What happens then? But again, this is me. This is how important I am. All that kind of stuff was going on. And my complaint did go as far as being debated. So this is really interesting. And this is what happens, isn't it? In terms of the bullying that goes on and the intimidation. The first debate was held on a Friday afternoon. And I don't know if you know anything about the Lords or the Commons, but what happens on a Friday, everybody leaves. They're normally out by midday. So this was a deliberate attempt to call this important debate when hardly anybody was there. But the people that were there were all his mates, okay? Led by Lord Panic, another barrister from Blackstone Chambers. And basically, I watched this on television. I wasn't there. And I remember watching it and tears just rolling down my face. The commissioner was ridiculed. I was ridiculed. They questioned my mental health. The victim blaming was horrendous. It's all out there, you can watch it. It's all written as well. And one by one, the alleged was elevated for his contributions, his history of what he's done in this country. And he also, Lord Panic, undermined the process of Code of Conduct, which had been approved by the House of Lords 7 times, including the alleged in 2010. But now it doesn't suit them because it's been used against them. And what he was insisting on was the right to cross-examine me, as you would cross-examine somebody in criminal proceedings. Can you imagine a woman reporting sexual harassment in the workplace and then having to be cross-examined by the perpetrator? That was basically the case they put across. And I just felt like the ghost at the banquet. It was horrendous watching that. It's one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever made, I have to say. And it was really, really a hard slog. What can I say? It's difficult to put into words, actually. But what followed was this. I was no longer anonymous. So he breached who I was. So now everybody knows who I am. I remember when I decided to come forward, and my daughter Natasha said to me, Mum, you're just leaving Karma Nirvana, why do you want to put yourself through this? And I said very quickly, simply, Natasha, it's for closure and change. This is about changing things, in this space. But now you know who I am, because this individual has told people who I am. He was suspended for that and investigated for that as well. So now I was being publicly named and shamed. The tweets were vile. The victim blaming went on for months. Why did she go in the car? She's empowered. Why didn't she report? Listening to Baronesses on Radio 4 talking about me being such an empowered woman, yet I didn't report. And we all know some people never report. It can take years to report, and digging for dirt to discredit me, even to the point where we live in a very rural village. And, you know, there was a reporter there going into my local to find out, you know, dirt on me and ringing ex-partners up. And this was a person connected to the alleged. And it just went on and on, you know. People forget, you know, when people report harassment and bullying, there is that experience, but then there's also that experience afterwards as well that we mustn't underestimate. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So you end up questioning yourself. You know, you're being tested. In your life, you will be tested, trust me, at times. You know, you question yourself. You certainly know who your friends are at that time. And I was starting to, you know, feel so low and depressed. The depression just took hold. And then something reminds you of who and what you stood for your whole life in that moment of questioning. You know, there's something there, isn't there? And I remember after the first debate, there was an open letter in the Times, and 74 staff members of the House of Lords had signed it. This was from the canteen assistant to the librarian to all these different people. So, you know, they signed this and said, how I'm treated, Jasvinder, will speak to us because we experience harassment and bullying every day. Now, for me, that was a turning point. And, you know, I remember being in a petrol station with John, and I keep on doing that because John's at the back. And he said, look at this paper, darling, look at this paper. Theresa May is talking about this case, the whole case now, and she's saying the House of Lords will not be allowed to mark its own homework. So you see light, you know. And I'm saying that to you because if you fundamentally have conviction and you believe in something, you know, for me, my test is always, can I sleep with my conscience? You know, and if you can't, then you have to keep on questioning that. So the second debate looked very different. This time, it was, everybody was there. And Baronesses has contacted me to say they're going to support me. And the overall consensus of that debate was this. The first debate was deemed to be ill-judged and a misconceived debate. The members of the House of Lords, especially the women, stood up and said, who was there to speak as my friends, Jasvinder's friends, to her character, to her achievements, because nobody did. You know, a juror would not sit in the case of a friend. Yeah? So who in the House was there to make the case for the complainant? You know, the commissioner did an excellent job and she applied the procedure. You know, they tried to undermine her. And there are reasons why victims do not complain immediately about sexual harassment or never complain about it. So you saw this one by one, you know, peers were sharing their personal experiences. I remember one baroness standing up and she says, probably every woman in this house will tell you how you get on with business trying to normalize things after being sexually harassed. Remember her saying that? And, you know, this, I've said this before, you know, in terms of my own, in terms of us as individuals, you know, when we stand up for all women. That's what we do. And you may not even know it. I didn't know those people in the House of Lords were experiencing this, were watching from afar and wanting to come out. So, you know, I stand by that. So in terms of the complaint, it was upheld, thankfully. He was suspended, recommended for expulsion, lost his appeal, but he resigned before the second debate. And I have to say, a very brave woman contacted me just before the second debate. And she said, Jasvinder, I would like to swear an affidavit to the commissioner because it happened to me by the same person. Bless her, she didn't have to do that, but she did, and she did. And I would say that was when he fell on his sword. So they endorsed the conclusions of the commissioner. He breached the provisions of the code in failing to act on his personal honour by sexually harassing me and offering me a corrupt inducement to sleep with him. And I can tell you what followed after that was this. This is an independent inquiry into sexual harassment by Ellenberg QC. She's a dame now. And this report came out in 2019 because they had to do something. No process, okay? 19 recommendations it has. And one of the things that she starts with is this, that the culture and behaviours are not conducive to an open and supportive culture to ensure that all those working there are treated with dignity and respect. And one thing I want to share with you in terms of the findings, you know, they're all there. I'm not going to go through them all, just very quickly. It clearly highlighted how staff have bullied and harassed other staff in the hierarchy there. You know, members have bullied and harassed staff. Individuals tended not to complain formally or otherwise in the belief that nothing would happen, or there were real fears of reprisals. The policies need amending and procedures. Well, you need to have one, first of all. There needs culture change. We've heard all this before, I know this. You know, and we need to enhance the options available to address inappropriate behaviour. I'm just going to give you one example because this, to me, always beggars belief when I read it. In the report, she talks about areas of concern, which she refers to as hotspots. What she means by that is, we need to install CCTV, she says in one of the recommendations. She says a number of people who were interviewed recounted the library and table offices are areas in which member traffic is high, and staff can be on duty late in the evening, working alone, and they are hotspots for poor behaviour. And I remember reading in that report, it's there to read, there's a particular lift where you're likely to get groped, so they have to put a camera in there. You know, I was in India a few years ago, and I remember being in this rural village where they were talking about the rights of women, and they were talking about young girls who, there was no sanitary conditions, so they had to go to the, behind the trees, you know, to go to the toilet. And they had a problem of boys looking at the girls, okay? So they called a village meeting. I was there. And the elders were saying, right, the girls need to be careful when they go into the fields and they use the toilets. You need to make sure the boy's not looking. They need to go further into the fields, etc. And this one elderly Asian woman just banged her hand down onto the table and said, no, why do the girls need to change their behaviour? The boys need to change their behaviour, actually. And this reminds me of that in some way. So when you look at this continuation of such behaviour, I still think the House of Lords have got a long way to go. So these are some of the things that came out of it. Appointing a critical friend now to whom they can talk with without fear. And that doesn't form part of the appraisal process. That was really important. They have constructive mentoring now. There's a neutral team now there to deal with concerns. And thankfully, there is a clear reporting process in place now. There's also an internal confidential helpline in the House of Lords where people can report. I'm pleased to say that reporting has increased since my complaint as well. And also, there are immediate meetings for the Clerk of Parliament where they discuss with members any issues raised by staff. So you can see things have changed in that space. Do you know, when he passed away, which I think was about 3 years ago, I think, looking at John again, I read the obituary, and in the obituary, the family has said his death had been brought on by my complaint. It just doesn't stop. And somebody posted a card hand-delivered to our house, condolences on the death of Lord Leicester. So the intimidation never stops. But do you know what? What I will say to you is, raising your head above the parapet takes guts. And it is something that we all have a responsibility to do. I don't regret it. You know, you may have seen in the press recently or last year in July, myself and my colleague Steve Reeves were sacked by the Church of England. You know, I was a survivor advocate. We were sacked because we did our job. We saw those members of the clergy and the abuse of victims and survivors. We spoke out, we built cases. We were very close to the truth. They didn't like it. There has been an independent review. Professor Jay's report came out last month. The Wilkinson report came out. And again, she's saying the same things what we were saying. But, you know, we got too close and off you go. I stand by it. But, you know, there will be people out there who will want me to speak in places like this. There'll be somebody out there who will want to employ me one day. But the point here is, you know, I'm not here to be liked. If you're here and you're here to make a difference, well, then you have to speak with conviction and with truth. And I've always done that. So what next? Well, I don't know any other way than to be true to myself. And I urge you to live your values. You know, raising my head with a parapet has become part of my DNA. And, you know, this is where we have to ask ourselves, well, what are our values? You know, mine are fairness and justice. You know, And I'm not saying it biblically, but, you know, in terms of doing unto others as you would do to yourself. You know, these measures, these sort of things you think about, people should be able to feel them when they meet you. And you carry them out in your everyday life. I'm not a big Elvis Presley fan, but I did see this quote, and I liked it. You know, values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do. And I would like to think that in my journey, I've left a legacy, and I will continue to do that because there is just too much to do. So I will end it there, and I'm sure I've gone over my time, which I apologize. That's my website, and that is me. And I thank you very much sincerely for listening to me.
Okay, is this working? Yeah. Thanks. Before we go to the questions, I just would really like to say thank you. But thank you to Jasvinder. Thank you for the talk, but thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for the laws that have made the future for people facing forced marriage different. Thank you for challenging the patriarchy, the powers that be, the upper echelons of British society by taking on the House of Lords. Thank you for challenging these culturally relativist understandings of forced marriage, and thanks for telling the world how it is. So I think a round of applause just to say thank you for everything that Jasvinder's done is what we need.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is over to you now. Do people have any questions they'd like to ask Jasvinder? I know we've got, I don't know how to access the ones online. But...
Slido. So there's a Slido online, which I can post in the chat. So there's nothing at the moment.
Okay, so over to you. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, straight away.
So I just want to ask, how does the cultural relativism within British multicultural discourse contribute to the invisibility of women who are victims of honour killings and the failure to acknowledge perpetrators who are primarily women?
Well, it absolutely does, because one of my experiences, not just as within my family dynamic, but also as a campaigner, is where people look at that abuse and they don't frame it as safeguarding. It's framed as being different. You know, it's part of one's tradition, religion, or culture. I always say cultural acceptance does not mean accepting the unacceptable. And it's been a real challenge. And if you look at it from the perspective of other areas, you know, what the families will do is they will hide behind that. So the practitioner will feel underconfident, not want to challenge, not want to tread on cultural toes or be called a racist. You know, that is something that we've all got to acknowledge and recognise. And if you are concerned about that, this is where you look to the statutory guidelines of forced marriage, honour abuse, female genital mutilation. This is where you call the helpline and have the conversation to frame it as a safeguarding issue, because that's what they hide behind. When I look at my sisters, you know, we were conditioned and groomed to believe that this was normal. You know, this was part of your tradition. That's why you don't go out and integrate. That's why you don't wear makeup. You know, you have to be modest. It's our religion. You know, as a young person growing up, it's very hard to question all that. You know, so we need a counter narrative. We need somebody to tell us this is not part of your tradition to be, you know, abused or coerced or accept or be deprived from independence. So it plays a huge role. And, you know, I don't think some people still are thinking there are real concerns around the repercussions of challenging culture to that regard. But I will say to you all that why is it, think about it, when I was at school and I was at risk of being forced into marrying a stranger, people looked the other way. Because why was that? When I, in 2008, I raised a question with the then Prime Minister about cases in Bradford. And in one academic year, over 120 South Asian females aged 15 to 16 went missing off one education role. And I questioned that. Where were they? Because nobody was looking for them. And I made the point, if these were 120 white females, this country would be jumping up and down. Why was nobody asking questions? Do you see what I'm saying? So that interplay is really important to challenge.
Thank you.
Thanks. Joyce has got a question here.
Thank you so much. That was really, really moving and thought-provoking. It seems schools are a big problem. Is there anything that's happening to try and teach or train the teachers to recognise this and what to do about it, rather than just do nothing?
Well, schools are at the heart of prevention, absolutely. And as a result of raising what was happening in Bradford, there was the DFE did an inquiry and looked at 15 areas of concern. And they highlighted a number of recommendations, but nothing is statutory. That's the problem. You know, you can look at PHSE. I know Karma Nirvana have a schools program, you know, and it is free. So if people can, it's getting the schools to allow the charity to go in to talk about it. That's what we need. You know, those times around summer when, you know, that's the heightened calls to the helpline, that's where people will be preparing children to take them abroad, etc. You know, we need schools to recognise that, as with me, the only place I had where I had independence was in school. So the only place where I'm going to hear another counter narrative or hear a different message is going to be in school. So it's not statutory. And I do think it needs to be, absolutely.
And that they need training on their teacher training as well.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, absolutely they do. Just as, you know, like now, a lot of people are doing policing degrees, you know, you need to be on your courses as nurses, etc. You know, there needs to be this conversation in terms of this abuse. Because at the end of the day, it is a professional that's going to be the one that's going to prevent it for that person, because that person has been taught to be silent, not to speak outside the family. So the likelihood of intervention is going to be coming from primary care or within education.
Yeah. Thanks. Go ahead, Ibrahim.
Hi. Ibrahim Abubakar. I'm the Provost for Health and Dean of the Faculty of Population Health Sciences. Thank you for being you and for all you've done. And thank you for coming to speak to us. My question is, looking around in this room, I count a very, very small number of men. I don't know how many are online. I hope there are many. The audience that should be listening to this are people like me, right? To what degree in your campaigning and your efforts would you say you have had the right audience, i.e. the people that you said earlier should change their behavior, joining and supporting, and what do you think we should do to shift that dial? Well,
I absolutely agree with you. And, you know, the Karma Nirvana reconstituted to start supporting men in 2008. And more men have become involved in terms of being volunteers. But one of the shifts I think I've seen is where there have been murders of women, and brothers and uncles have come forward to Karma Nirvana, who speak at the National Day of Remembrance, who are taking a platform with the charity, because they have a power, and they have a power to speak out. I don't know if any of you watched the documentary The Push on Channel 4. It was on Sunday and Monday of this week. If you haven't, please watch it, because you will see the uncles in there. You will see the men actively speaking out in terms of their niece that was murdered by this man in Scotland. So it's a really difficult one to say, because I always put my hand out to work with the community. There was a seat at the table, but they never came. You know, that community engagement is important. It is significant. But I really think that we cannot wait for them to come to the table. I do think religious leaders have a huge role to play in this space. You know, we know that Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism fundamentally speaks out against abuses and harming children, but we're not hearing our leaders say this. Not my leaders, but, you know, those men in the community. Predominantly, they are men, let's be honest. You know, and it also includes the men who are in positions of power, as in our politicians, our local councillors, our leaders. But how? I think Karma Nirvana are making some inroads in terms of the engagement and the reporting of men. But you're right, you know, tomorrow's International Women's Day. You know, the history of women's sacrifice and men being part of that as well is really important. I have a son, you know, I have 3 grandsons. You know, the role of men and boys is significant to this campaign.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah, at the back there. The man, yeah.
The man. There you go, there's one more. Hand there.
Sorry. Thank you so much for your talk today. My question's less on the topic, more about your motivation. And you mentioned there was that period when you started the charity between 93 and 96,
yeah,
where you were really struggling to get anyone noticing what you're doing. I just wanted to ask how you found the motivation and what drove you to carry on going through those years when, you know, there was nothing coming through and when you were being silenced by those around you.
I think my motivation was the injustice of Rubina's death. You know, many charities are born out of an injustice. It's a catalyst. And I was so angry, and I was using that and challenging that into doing something, as opposed to, you know, harming myself or, you know, internally. I could have done all sorts of things. And for me, I just felt so driven that people needed to hear about her death, because how can it be right that, you know, my mother said it was better for her to take her life. So that, for me, that injustice and that feeling of that injustice and that conviction, the more people said no, the more I said, no, I'm going to make you listen. And I found ways. I remember, you know, Karma Nirvana was always named a women's health project in the beginning, because you couldn't talk about forced marriage. You couldn't even use the word forced marriage. So we were always a women's health project. So I used to organize talks around PMT or breast cancer, and I trained to become a Keep Fit instructor. And I'd go to the Indian Community Center, the Pakistan Community Center, and women would come, I'd cover the windows. So they would come to do Keep Fit, but at the end of it, I would always say, and by the way, there's this charity and we're talking about these things, and they would start talking about domestic abuse. So I think my motivation was the injustice. And if I'm really honest with you, I think part of it was the rejection from my family. I'm always being made to feel I wasn't good enough. In the beginning, some of my motivation came from wanting to prove to them that I was good enough and that I was capable. I wanted to show them. And then it became less about that and more about myself.
Thank you. You at the front with the brown top? Okay, so just behind, yeah.
Is it a
Yeah.
lady here?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, please speak.
Come to you next.
Thank you very much for talking. You
Thank you.
really moved me to want to do some action. I feel like you've made so much change and initiated so much change. So I've kind of got a two-part question. One of it is, what would be your ideal next steps to see, like in legislation change and in cultural change? And the second part is, do you have any suggestions to get people who are not part of the culture or the community, people who it doesn't necessarily touch, to become part of the narrative?
I'm going to answer the second question first, because I have to say it was people who were not from the same background as me that were the driving force in supporting it. You know, it was like-minded people that said this was wrong. You know, and sometimes you'd meet them and they would have, I welcome ignorances. I welcome people saying, well, is it part of your course to be forced into marriage? Because that's an opportunity to have a conversation from my perspective, you know. So I would say for those people wanting to get involved, please go to the website, Karma Nirvana's website. There's so much you can do, you know, in your area. They want people to distribute posters. They want you to organize workshops, etc. You know, ask them, and they will give you a list of things of what you can do in terms of being mobilized. I can see volunteers here that help Karma Nirvana. I'm looking at you, Asma, still helping us today. The other question is, what next? I really don't know. I am writing my 4th book, really reflecting in terms of my own journey. And I think sometimes you have to be still and get out of the way of yourself and think about what is next. And in all honesty, you know, when you are a campaigner and a founder of a charity, it was never a 9-to-5 job. It consumes you. You know, my children used to say there are not 3 children, Mum. The 4th at the dinner table is Karma Nirvana. You know, my son's first word, I think, was Karma Nirvana. So, you know, I'm really thinking about what next. I really am. I've just become a trustee for a huge whistleblowing organisation. I know whatever I do, I want to speak to the heart of things that people choose to keep silent, and to help those people who find it difficult to speak to be supported, and to help give them voices in terms of a platform. I know I want to do that, and to get that work-life balance one day and spend more time with the grandchildren.
Thanks. The woman 3 in from the middle on the 4th row, please.
And who knows, I might apply to the House of Lords. I'll get there on merit one day.
Did you choose to raise your kids in the Sikh culture and the religion, or did you believe that that's just something not to kind of introduce them to, considering everything you went through because of the culture and religion?
Okay, so did I choose to raise my children within the Sikh religion or not? Their grandparents are Sikh and traditional Sikh, and I respect that. I respect the Sikh faith. You know, it was founded on equality. You know, it was founded to abolish the caste system, inequality. But as we know, religion can be abused. You know, it can be used as a tool to oppress people. So, you know, I did my dissertation in women and Sikhism. If I was taught that the way it really is, I would have still be a Sikh today. You know, so with my children, yes, I've taught them what it is, but I've taught them in terms of whatever they want to choose. I've never said to them, have this religion or that religion, whatever. But growing up with their grandparents, they've gone to the Gurdwara, and I welcome that. But I will say and share something with you, and that is when my daughter Natasha was 15, I had this conversation with her, and bear with me, and I would say to her, whatever you do when you grow up, Natasha, and decide to get married, do not go out with an Indian boy. And she would say, I'm looking at you now, no disrespect, and she would say, Mum, you can't say that, that's racist. And I would say to her, the thing is, Natasha, I'm a parent, okay, I'm your mum. And when you marry an Indian boy, you don't marry a boy, you marry a family. Now, what they see on your dad's side is absolutely fine. But when they look on your mum's side, what are they going to see? They're going to see a woman who ran away from home, twice divorced, a stroppy campaigner to boot. I don't want them to take it out on you. That's what I said to her. So she goes off to Leeds Uni and she meets an Indian boy. You know, because your children will do the opposite of what you ask them to. And I have to be honest with you. And I think part of, you know, campaigning, even as individuals, the more honest you are, I think the more people can see how sincere you are. He was guilty until proven innocent, in my eyes, you know. And to my shame, I will say, when I got to know his family, and I did say, you know, Sonny, his name is, can you ask your mum to read my book? I met his family, and his grandfather came to this country the same time as my father. His father, Sonny's father, had an arranged marriage when he was 20, and he has a very happy arranged marriage. So he raised Sonny and his sister to be educated, and they said, you know, we don't care who you marry. She can be black, white, pink, as long as she's a Leeds United supporter, we don't care, you know. And so she met him, and it challenged me. But do you know what it also did? It enabled me to embrace what was all that is beautiful about my history, about my culture and the tradition. And the reason why I didn't take part in it was because it was too painful. Because if anybody knows anything about, you know, Indian culture, it is beautiful, but you have to have a family to share it with. Yeah. So the pain of not having that, it always reminded me of the missing. So that's why I moved away from it. So if that answers the question.
Thanks for sharing those memories. Any more questions in here?
I think this lady had a question here, the lady at the back.
At the back, yeah.
All right.
You spoke about family honour, and I wondered if you'd done any outreach work or anything to interrogate why the idea of family name or honour feels so defining for some people in this country, something to be so doggedly guarded and protected.
We did some research with Professor Paul Gilbert, who's a clinical psychologist, and Paul has got what's called the School of Shame now in Derby, and compassionate mind theories, etc. He's great, and we did some research together across 3 generations of South Asian women, from 16 right up to 75, and in Punjabi there isn't actually a word for depression. You have to use lots of different words to describe mental health. And so we talked to them about mental health, and none of them could talk about mental health without talking about honour and their responsibility to honour. It's a really good piece of research. You can Google it, it's out there, and it's still very relevant as far as I'm concerned. But one of the things that I would like to do, and I'm looking at it at the moment, is going into prisons to talk to mothers who murdered their daughters. I'd like to understand that. I mean, people, what motivates a mother to kill their daughter? I can't answer that question. But what I do know is that when I look at my own mother, whom I forgive completely, and my father, my mother was only doing what she was thought was best. But equally, that doesn't make it right. But she was also doing it to be accepted by the family and the community. So what I have to understand that. Which is why the criminalisation of forced marriage was really important. And one thing that is changing is more young people are calling the helpline and saying it's helped them to use it, to say, don't do this to me, you could go to prison for 7 years. And that gives the parent permission to tell somebody in India, it's against the law here. You see what I mean? So things like that are helpful, I think.
Okay, thanks. We can take another couple of questions.
Hi, thanks again for your talk. I found it really interesting, and I think
Thank
your
you.
story is just incredible. What was it, out of curiosity, that made you realise that what was going on was wrong? Because you were so young, and because it had happened to your sisters, it was kind of the norm. And
Yeah.
in your culture, I understand it is and can be the norm. So what made you realise that actually, I don't want this for myself? Your sisters had gone along with it. Had you spoken to other people who had influenced you at all?
Yeah. So I mean, I asked that question, why me? How is it out of 7? I was one that said no. I think what was really important was the order of age. So I have one sister younger than me. So I saw what was happening in my sisters' marriages, and I saw the abuse. Well, when my sisters were abused by their husbands, my mother and father would bundle us in the car, would go there, see my mum sit there and talk her into staying there and come back. And that was my impression of marriage. I thought you get married, you get beaten up and nobody comes to rescue you. 3 of my sisters were in mental health institutions, so that was my idea, that's what happens to you when you got married. I just fundamentally questioned it for that reason. Plus, I was the only one born in a hospital and born upside down. All my other sisters were born at home. I was different from birth. But the sad thing is that my sister was forced to marry the man that I was promised to when I left. So to honour the promise of marriage, they forced my younger sister to marry him. And she did end up leaving him as well. So I think age was important in terms of, for me personally, seeing that. Maybe if I hadn't witnessed all that, it might have been different. Because like I said, parents have power. And you don't want to disappoint your parents, you don't want to let them down, and then they start reminding you of how much they've done for you, and then guilt trip you and all the rest of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. One last question. Yeah.
So my name is Helena. Thank you so much for the talk. It was great.
Thank you. Helena.
Thank you. It was. So I think when you first ran away, there didn't seem to be like an agreed public opinion on forced marriages. So my topic is surrogacy. So basically, I like writing and reading about reproductive health and rights, and everyone seems to have an opinion about abortion and abortion policies. Hopefully everyone has the same one, but but then when it comes to surrogacy, people don't know much about surrogacy. I didn't know much about surrogacy before I started researching about it. So there's not really like a public opinion about it, and now I think I've probably talked about surrogacy with hundreds of people, and my circle around me know more about surrogacy, and I think it's one of those things where the more you know about it, the more, you know, the harder it is to justify it, basically. So how did you, at the beginning, how did you get the word across? How did you, I don't know, spread the word that, I don't know, how did you shape a bit opinions without basically going out there and preaching to people that, you know?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is difference of opinion is an opportunity to have a conversation, you know, and people will still say sometimes, you know, isn't it your religion to be forced to marry a stranger? Isn't it what you do? You know, I don't go, what do you mean? And horrified. That is a real opportunity to educate somebody and to have a conversation. And the more you keep on doing that and finding opportunities, it's like a snowball effect, a domino effect. And get more people to talk about it. So like now, you know, Karma Nirvana have trained 38 of the UK 43 police forces. You know, so you start with one police force and another one, and etc. You know, more people are now doing the work of child marriage, forced marriage, because they've been held to account for it. You know, they feel the responsibility of it. And I think there's no greater way than to speak to somebody's compassion. Yeah, you know, again, go back to Maya Angelou, people might forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. You know, if you're passionate about that subject and you want somebody to feel what you're feeling, then there's an opportunity, and then they'll go pass it on to somebody else. So I think that's how we managed to do it. And Parliament has a huge role to play in the conversation. So, you know, the government, I don't say the government gave us a criminal offence. They didn't give us anything. You know, we fought for that. You know, we knocked on doors. You know, 4 prime ministers said no, but we kept on going and kept on going. So, you know, you hold on to that vision and think, you know, I'm not taking no for an answer. You know, I'm going to find a way and take an army of people with me as well. And, you know, Natasha will always say, Mom, stop exaggerating. You know, like I'd say, well, you know, I think it's okay to exaggerate in the interest of good sometimes. So you might say, you know, we had 200 calls to the helpline this month. Well, actually, we had 300 calls to the helpline this month. You know what I'm just saying that sometimes, you know, because people, you know, why would they know about surrogacy? Why would they know about forced marriage, you know, in your everyday life? You know, you're giving them something that is new to them. And I see that as a real opportunity to say, hey, let me tell you about this, and it's happening right here. And if you have people with experience, that is just the best thing. I learned that very quickly. Taking them with me to the table is the greatest testimony that people need to hear. In fact, I believe wherever you're campaigning, it has to start there. And then they're the voice of experience, and they should be shaping everything.
Okay, thanks so much, Jasvinder. It's just been wonderful listening to you, and hopefully you've got a room of new recruits here for Karma Nirvana and spreading the word and leafleting and everything else you need. The information's up here. So I think we've got book signing now, but can we just have a final round of applause, please, for Jasvinder?
Thank you.